Joe, welcome to the Basketball Podcast.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate you having me on. Really a pleasure to be here.
Cool to have you. And man, what an experience the whole time with South Sudan, but certainly going to the Olympics and all the success from that. And imagine that goes back to two players that came through your program at Blair, and look at what life brings you.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, my first two recruits at Blair Academy, Royale Ivy and Luol Deng, one was 14 and one was 17. And I was just a former second assistant at the Division I level, taking on a prep school job. And 25 years later, we come full circle. We're in the opening ceremonies together with actually another one of my former players, Mariel Shayak, who's a Canadian guy who played here as well and played on our South Sudan team. So thrilling stuff. And those guys have been blessing my life for over 2 decades now, and the blessings continue.
Just a great example of a program that gives and gives back, and just a beautiful story for all around. Maybe just frame it for us. We're going to get into all your background and a lot of your philosophy in terms of basketball, but maybe just give us a little bit of the experience for you being at the Paris Olympics. What was your role through this process? What were you contributing to the development of South Sudan basketball?
Well, a lot of people don't know, but this was our fourth summer together. We were the last ranked team in Africa 4 years ago, and we've ascended through Afrobasket, through the World Cup. By being the number one African team in the World Cup, we were able to qualify for the Olympics. So it was a long journey, a lot of time spent in Kigali, Rwanda, and all over Africa. But it's meant so much. We've given hope to a country, we've given an identity to a country, and we've really used athletics and basketball for good, trying to change the narrative of a country that there's lots of talk about starvation and violence and civil war. And for South Sudan to be in the news for positive things, I think just means the world to the citizens of South Sudan who are scattered all over the world, as you know.
And absolutely. And you've been doing such positive things through 400 plus wins at Blair Academy as well. And maybe talk to us just quickly about like sustaining success at a place where, again, you helped build the tradition, you helped build the culture, and now sustaining it.
I'll tell you, when I got here in 1999 from my college coaching background, I met with our legendary wrestling coach here, Jeff Buxton, who's the Bob Hurley or the Morgan Wooten of high school wrestling. And he's no longer here, but he was here for 15, 17 years that I was here. And I said, Coach, how do you do it here? How do you build a dynasty? Not that I thought I could do that, but just how do I build it? How do I get it going? And he said, hey, listen, it's really hard to build, but he said it's even harder to sustain. So he said, you need to decide right now, if you plan on being at Blair for a long time and you have the wherewithal to build a program, you need to understand that if you build it, then you have to sustain it. And that's harder and it takes a lot of energy to sustain it. And I tell people all the time, when I lose the drive and the energy to keep us at the level we're at now and to continue to work and continue to grow and continue to learn from people like you, Chris, if I don't keep up that growth mindset, then that's when I'm going to be out of it and can pass it on to my associate head coach and go from there.
I can confirm from our conversations at USAB and that you have not lost that growth mindset. You had some great questions. We had great conversations, and it was tremendous to be able to talk to you about that. And one of the things that we're going to dive in today is game plan D. So maybe just outline, what is that?
I tell you, at the prep school level, we work really hard, much like a college team, and that's my background, to try to take away the other team's stuff, to try to have game plan defense for the other team's best players, which is obviously easier said than done. And it's funny, we've always had this identity of trying to win special teams, trying to take away the other team's pet plays, trying to play best player defense against the other team's best guys. And right after the pandemic, I met with my staff and I decided, hey, we're spending so much time on walkthroughs and film. Let's dive more into us and get away from that, even though that had been our program's identity for decades. And my coaches were fine with it. When I brought it to my older players, they really pushed back and they said, no, it's who we are, coach. Like, we want to do this. We don't want to do less game plan. We don't want to do less walkthroughs. We don't want to do less film. Like, we love taking the other team's best plays away and winning special teams. And so it's become one of our identities here. It's something we're proud of. We work really hard at it. And going back to the summer experiences I've had with FIBA, I think we've gotten even better at it, because when you're around those pro guys, their terminology, the way they teach some of the things, I think we've gotten even better at it, and I've learned. And so it's just one of the things that we hang our hat on here.
I love it. And especially because it's player led at this point, that they realize the value of it and they feel empowered because they know something that will help them, give them an advantage. So maybe outline for us what for specifically your game plan D, what are the key components for it?
It's funny, like you have to decide. So we have two phases to it. One phase is, and we call it the dance steps. How are we going to cover a UCLA screen? How are we going to guard a flare? How are we going to guard a cross screen? All the different actions and how are we going to guard them? And some of the actions, we have multiple ways we can guard them, and we'll have to decide on that particular game. Obviously, you have to decide your ball screen coverages, how you're going to guard certain guys in ball screens, certain parts of the floor. But then you have to decide, some of it is just, can we just disrupt them with ball pressure? Can we disrupt them playing a ball screen a certain way? So the decision always has to be made between the dance steps and the disruption. And it really depends on the personnel of the other team. We just came off beating one of the best prep school teams in the country this past weekend. And we went through the dance steps for 3 days. They run all this stagger, cross screen stuff, and it was really hard to guard. But we landed on, let's understand the dance steps, but let's make sure they run their offense 4 feet out from where they want to run their offense. And let's make sure their ball reversal isn't made in rhythm and we're going to throw their timing off. So I think that's the art of it, is deciding where you're disrupting and where you need to know the dance steps.
Such a great point because again, too many of the dance steps can bog a player down, right? I got to do this, I got to do this, instead of making decisions and being reactive or proactive in terms of disruption, as you said. Such a great point with that. Wondering then, how do you implement this? Because again, it sounds great. A lot of coaches produce the paper, they produce the video, but how do you get your players to actually apply it?
I think early in the season, when we're doing what the pro guys call mix master. So we'll do a lot of defensive breakdown work where we'll say, hey, we're going to guard 5 actions at once. We're going to layer offensive actions. We're going to name the offensive actions, and then we're going to teach you how to guard each action. But we want you to do it one after the next. So the NBA guys that I have the pleasure of working with in the summers, they call that mix master. We call that mix master at USAB as well when I coach with the US junior national team. So there's layering the mix master in the early season. And then there's just tons of game preparation later in the year when our practices aren't as intense. There's a lot of walking through the dance steps. So this is how we're going to guard that. And then, of course, you get into ball screens. We guard ball screens different ways with different guys, different parts of the court. So you really have to be organized in your coverages as well.
I love this idea of mixed master because this is where I say to coaches, like, I'm not anti shell, but I'm anti doing shell continuously the same way all the time. So what you're referencing there is that basically you're mixing things together so they have to retrieve it in their brain, and that leads to better retention so they can identify these patterns. Just adding a little bit of the teaching to it, because I know with you, Joe, we can't take the teacher out of the teaching, right?
No, it's absolutely right. And these are some of the things that I learned from you and your podcasts and your videos a number of years ago when you came into this space. I used to want to run those beautiful, pretty practices when people would come in. We have college coaches in our practices all the time. And when I was a younger, more insecure coach, I wanted to run these beautiful practices. I wanted to have these college assistants say, oh, what a great practice that was. It was on time. It was organized. Everybody did everything perfect. And what we learned was the game's not played that way. It's sloppy. Guys have to find solutions. And so what we try to do is create sloppy scenarios that they have to guard. And it's served us so much better because, as we know, so many of these games, the stops don't necessarily come on the dance steps, but somebody might have to make a late veer and just figure it out on the fly. And so we want to give the guys the terminology and the freedom so that they need to go off the plan defensively, they can go off the plan as well.
Love that phrasing, the terminology and the freedom, two very important parts to defense, and especially developing modern conceptual players, which I know is big for you as well. One of the barriers coaches constantly throw out to doing this type of thing, game plan D and mix master and these different things. Oh, I have a player that can't figure it out. Can you talk to us about those players? Because yes, they can figure it out, can't they?
Yeah, I think they can. I think everything needs to be named. I think there needs to be accountability. I think you need to understand how those guys learn or struggle to learn, right? Like, we're going to teach through video. We teach through short edits, quick video. Almost every day we're showing edits of something. So some guys learn that way. I'll still draw things up on the board. And then we teach all of our actions at the beginning of practice before we even get warmed up. So sometimes I think before the brain gets all scattered and guys get fatigued, we try to do the bulk of our conceptual teaching even before we stretch. So those are all ways to do it. And then the other thing is we know who the guys are that aren't great learners on our team. We try to simplify things for them. And I learned from my mentor, Steve Clifford, sometimes if a guy has a great skill he's bringing to the table and he's not the best learner, you're just going to have to live with it. And that's the other thing. Don't let one guy who's not the greatest learner keep you from coaching at a high level for 9 other guys, especially if that guy's getting you 17 points a game. You might just need to turn your head once in a while when he goes under the pin down instead of locking and trailing. Again, this is year 26 for me as a head coach. There's an art and there's a science. I take very seriously the science, but there's still an art to all this.
Oh, I love that part. Don't let one player hold it back. And I totally agree with that. And generally, that one player, if you're playing them anyways, they can figure out some solutions that work for them as well. And they don't always have to be our solution. And I love that part of this coaching process. So you mentioned your ball screen defense. So talk to us a little bit about this lock left ball screen defense that I know is important to you.
We were trying to go to an all-encompassing lock left a few years ago. We had just come off a state championship, and I really try to disrupt my team when we're coming off of championship seasons. We're telling them to stay humble and not just run it back and not do the same things over and over. We need to model that as coaches. And so we really try to be disruptive in the face of good seasons, and we've had a number of them of late. And one of the changes we wanted to make to our defense was lock left. And while I love the overall concept of lock left, we weren't really a denial team. So I didn't really want to try to keep the ball on one side, which I think is at the heart of being a true lock left. And where we landed was sending right-handed players marginally left, but also in ball screens. We're playing weak ball screen defense to the dribbler's left hand on the offensive right, and we're icing on the offensive left. And so what we're trying to do is send everybody to their left because we feel like they can't pass with their left hands. They can't make the pocket pass oftentimes. They certainly can't make the hook pass to the shake up behind the ball screen with their weak hand usually. And of course, the obvious question is what happens if you run into a great left-handed guard? We're going to live with that. That's one of the things. That'd be a great way to beat us right now is come in with a dynamic left-handed guard. But I think if you're playing the math, sending people left and making them make passes and decisions with their weak hand can be very beneficial. And even finishing, we run into a lot of high-level Division I guards at this prep school level. We have a national schedule, but still a lot of these guys are going to struggle to finish left-handed in traffic, and they're certainly going to struggle to pass off the ball screens with their other hand.
I love it. You just nailed the key part that I get asked all the time. I learned it from Dave Smart years ago. And all coaches ask, what about the left-handed players? And I'm like, early on in learning, don't even worry about them. Don't
Right.
even worry about them. Like it's everyone's doing the same. So you keep it consistent. And then once they learn it, then maybe you can adapt a little bit to the lefties, but initially don't worry about it. Just in terms of your experience with this, in terms of ball screen defense, then what are some of the key teaching points for the stance of the player, particularly on switching the two different stances on both sides of the floor?
Ran into some issues in what I would call the right upper quads. When we're sending guys left to the nail, my guys would tend to get too open and given up blow bys from the right quad. And so one of the ways we went away from what Dave Smart would teach is we're just guarding square in the right quad. So we're not really sending it left. We're not saying that we're guarding it square because we were just opening too much. But everywhere else on the court, the other 3 quads, we're on that inside shoulder and we're sending the ball hard left. We know where the built-in help is coming from. We don't have to switch our foot angles on ball screens. We're already built in. So we're ready to ice on one side. We're ready to weak on the other side. So we're not flipping our foot angles around. And we like that in terms of our ball screen defense. And then in New Jersey, and I don't know about everywhere, but we can be really physical with the weeks and the ices. We can really get up on hips. I teach it the same way we teach it in FIBA in the summertime. Be really physical on the hip and take the ball physically to the ball screen. In our state, we can do that. Sometimes we go out of state and the refs don't always let us be quite as physical at the point of attack as we normally are. But that physicality, if you have tough physical guards, it really will just not allow themselves to be turned down. It makes a big difference.
And you generally heard the philosophy like, let's be overly physical and adjust the other way instead of it's really hard to adjust to be more physical.
No question. No question.
A lot of teams are, I shouldn't say a lot of teams, NBA, college, you see a little bit more icing in college. So NBA, you saw it for a long time, a lot of icing. And now I'm seeing it a little bit more in high school basketball, and you've been doing it for a while. Talk to coaches a little bit about the advantage of icing certain ball screens.
Yeah, I think listen, if you have a either a positionally big or if you have a slower big that you don't want to bring up to touch all the time and you want to leave them back, I like the ice because I feel like we are dictating to the offense. We are sending them where we want them to go. We can either overhelp from the weak side or stay home and just guard it 2-on-2, depending on personnel. So we've liked it. And when we have an undersized, not a great rim protecting big, we'll move the drop, the quote unquote drop up the touch, and we'll ice it right to a trap or ice it to a very high drop. So I think there's a lot of flexibility with icing. I think people think you got to play way back, and you certainly can, but I think you can vary the depths of the drop. And I think that's the part that a lot of high school coaches miss that I've talked to anyway. These college coaches are a lot smarter than I am, but some of the high school coaches that I talk to I always tell them you can vary the depth of the drop. You can trap out of an ice if you want to. So there's ways you can make up for it if you're at a public high school and you have a 6'4" big, still do this, even if you don't have great rim protection.
Middle of the floor ball screens, still the dominant offensive style in high school, I imagine, and certainly in terms of what I've watched so far. So I imagine that's the priority in terms of a lot of the teaching in terms of ball screen. So talk to us about that. How do you implement the weak philosophy in the middle of the floor?
Yeah, the weak philosophy is easy in the middle of the floor when we can get it to the weak. The issue is if you can picture if they're sending the ball, if they want to go right in the middle of the court and you're in the middle third, we don't really want to jump up and ice. So that's the one place we don't want to ice in the middle third. So that's the one place where we'll strong, we call it strong, and we'll jump on the hip and send it strong. And that's the one place on the court where we've changed and we have to change our foot angle and send it strong because it's just too hard to jump up and weak. You're effectively icing a ball screen going right. And we've struggled with that a little bit. That's the one alteration we've had to make and go to this strong coverage and just let our bigs just play up to touch on either side of the screen. And frankly, that's been the area we've had to spend a little extra time on of late.
And you referenced a little bit some game plan D. You referenced it when you talked about it a little bit, having multiple ball screen coverages. You have an A, you have a B, you have a C, whatever it may be. So what is the default kind of B for you if these aren't working?
Yeah, we run into some pick and pop bigs, so we need to have a solution for that. So we'll jam and go under often against pick and pop bigs. We'll blitz if we want to just get it out of a great player's hand. So we have both of those ready to roll. And those are the B and the C. And it's interesting. I run a coach's clinic a round table every summer. And I had a really well-respected small college head coach who's won 1 million games at my clinic this summer. And he said, I'd rather have 4 ball screen coverages and we do them all at a B or a B minus level than try to be great at one coverage. And while I patently disagree with that, I've been thinking, I can't get that out of my head all fall and all winter. I can't get that out of my head that just giving, and I saw this summer with these great FIBA Olympic guards, like just giving people different puzzles to solve, even if you're not great at it, especially with these elite guards, isn't a bad way to go either. So that's one of the things that I'm thinking on right now. And maybe I should be spending more time on B and C. But right now we're be great at A philosophy. But legendary small college coach in our area, he's got me thinking. And again, I want to stay fresh and I want to make sure I don't just, this is the way we've always done it. This is the way we're going to continue to do it, Chris. So I don't know what your insights are on that, but that's one of the things I'm thinking on right now.
Yeah, it's through 350 plus podcasts. I could tell you that there's coaches, probably it's 50-50. There's some coaches that just say, we're going to do what we're going to do. And then there's coaches that want to mix it up constantly to keep the offense on edge. So I get both ways. I'm probably more aligned with the 4 different coverages, only because, again, I do like to mix it up. And I like to mix it up not just for the defense or for the offense, but for our defense too, because I feel like we become better offensive players in practice playing
Mhm.
against variable styles. And to me, it always shifts back from the development perspective to offense more. But again, can't go wrong. Isn't that a beautiful thing? Having coach as long as you can, just have to figure it
Yeah,
out relative to your team.
for sure. For sure.
Two side break. What stimulated you to adapt the two side break?
ran, I think, what old guys like me and you would call more of a Carolina break for years, was a rim runner and a trailer in the middle of the floor. Saw people like you talking about it, saw Billy Donovan at Florida. I'm going back a ways, spacing out that 4-man to the 2 side. And I've had such dynamic guards the last 7 or 8 years that I wanted to just give them space to play. And I thought it organized our break. I loved keeping us wide. It led to more 3-point shots. It led to more paint touches and spray outs in transition. We've always played fast. I pushed Royale to consider running a little wider this summer with our South Sudan team, which he liked. And so we tried to push that running routes a little wider. You have guys with habits that they're not used to running that wide. So I would say if you saw us, there'd be some great 2-side transition and there'd be some not so great spacing. But I've just loved it. I think it has fit our personnel, fit our dynamic guards. And now this year I have a 6'11" guy who's a really good rim runner. I basically tell him, you can rim run in our 2-side break if you get out early. He's usually caught in the scrum and is trailing the play, but I'm allowing him to rim run if he can get out early. Never worried about doing it perfectly, more worried about finding what fits our personnel. But it's been a boon for us. And then we tag out these 3s in transition and guys coming in from width and being able to run in on the top side and tag up in transition. It all seems to fit together for our group. It's been led to more offensive rebounding, more 3s, and more paint touches.
It's beautiful. And I love that because, again, you phrased it. Don't get bogged down by whether it's a middle runner or you run to 5 out. It does not matter in the 2-side. It can be both. It can be one. It can be any. It's so adaptable in that way. And I will say this, and I'm not sure. I know you've run your camp forever and you've done a lot of stuff at the youth level, so you can probably relate to this. The best thing that I've ever done for youth development is to teach them the 2-side concepts, to get them to understand space. An extreme version of space maybe for some, but it just helps them understand the value of space. And once they learn it, they literally don't want to do anything else except for run to space.
Yeah, no, totally agree. All that boomerang stuff on the 2-side, and it the only thing it does is it disrupts our defensive transition because we're so good at getting it to the other side of the court. My guys don't always want to load to the ball side in defensive transition. So much like you were talking about with ball screens, it disrupts our defensive transition a little bit, which again, ultimately is a good thing, but it makes for some ugly defensive transition possessions at times and makes this old head coach a little nuts when we're giving up open 3s in transition.
Yeah, because they're programmed to get out wide. I totally can relate to that. But the advantage, you mentioned having some elite guards, the advantage again in the 2-side, like everyone thinks about it as like early and opposite, get the ball sprayed early and opposite. And that's absolutely a huge part of it. But the best thing is once you start spraying it early and opposite, it creates so much space for those drives from the handler. Just because, again, the defense, as you just referred to, they just get out wide.
Yeah, that probe action, when they carry it over half court with the dribble and just probe and touch the paint, there's nothing that we do on offense that's harder to guard than that. That's the single hardest thing to guard that we run. And people say, so you mean he gets the outlet pass and he probes right to the paint? And I said, yes. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Like you guys are on Twitter finding all these crazy screen the screener plays. And I love that too. I'll nerd out with the best of them. But like, we are trying to create advantages on offense. The best way to create an advantage is in a 5-on-4 or 4-on-3. And I have a dynamic guard who can touch the paint. That's the easiest advantage to create. And while I'd love for everyone to say I'm this great tactical offensive coach, that is the single easiest way to create an advantage. And it's an easy read that we work on every day. And so let's not make this harder than it has to be.
You are a great tactical coach in the sense that you gave them the spacing template to make this happen more often than not. And that is, again, I just got back from watching a bunch of EYBL Scholastic teams and different levels of teams like that, incredibly well-coached teams, but there's always this fight for space in games. And the more you can do to help your players create and maintain and leverage space, the better they're going to be. Talk to us then a little bit about how you develop the 2-side concepts within your practice. What does it look like when you're developing these concepts?
Yeah, it's a similar template to how we do a lot of things. We'll teach it whole so that they understand it. We'll break it down into advantage situations, 3-on-2s and 2-on-1s and 4-on-3s, so that they'll build confidence and the reads are easy. And then when we ultimately get back to the 5-on-5, we'll teach it 5-on-5 and 5-on-0. We'll do the breakdown work and advantage them so that the reads are easy. and obvious. And then when we get back to the 5-on-4s and the 5-on-5s, they can start to see the reads. And then we spend a lot of time with film, showing them when we don't make the right read and showing them when they didn't fight for space. I have a young 24-year-old assistant. And we laugh. He's our spacing coach. He's the guy that's constantly stopping it, talking about we need to be higher in the quads, wider in transition, all the way to the corner, not 2 steps out of the corner, and just fighting for every foot of space, especially on a high school court. We played this weekend on a college court. It was much easier to fight for that space, but on a high school court with the size of guys that I have and our opponents have, it can be hard. So we teach almost everything that way. Teach it whole, break it down into advantages, show film, and then come back whole again at the end. I think that's the best way to teach it. And I think we can get a slow understanding and then make quick progress.
I love it. Love that you outlined that. And the one thing about the two side as well is clearly you referenced this earlier, so I want you to emphasize it because I think coaches get obsessed with perfection. But once they know the two side, it's actually the imperfections that help you because suddenly the bunch spacing or the awkward spacing sometimes where you have a three side maybe, that actually creates a huge advantage if your players learn how to figure it out per what you said. Can you talk a little bit about that process as the two side evolves?
Yeah, listen, you end up with that accidental 3-side. It's a great time for a late 45 cut. It's a great time for an empty side ball screen opposite the 3-side. It's a great time to quickly reverse the ball to the 3-side and get into that European ball screen action that you can run, get into some zooms and some handoffs, empty out the 45s. Yes, I think that 3-side, I have 2 point guards that can actually see that in real time and react to it and run into an open side ball screen, which I don't think that's as easy to do for many high school kids, but I have 2 power 5 guards right now with a ball in their hand and they can see that. And then we've just worked a ton on cutting. And so whether it be out of the imperfect 3-side, but all those baseline cuts in our drag action, all the 45 cuts, zoom actions, those are so easy to run out of that 2-side spacing. So whether it's perfect spacing or whether it's imperfect spacing, giving these guys solutions and then let them play out of those solutions. And like I said, irrespective of it all, if the point guard can just touch the paint, or you can get into an early drag out of that and just touch the paint off of a roll, everything else gets simple after that.
Some stuff. And another thing important to your program, radical transparency, truth telling, however you want to say it. Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah, this is what people want to talk to me more about. They're not necessarily coming for X's and O's, but the culture piece to our program is what I'm most proud of. We've won a lot of championships and placed 90 guys at Division I schools. But at the end of the day, I think we're using the bouncing ball to teach young men to be able to navigate life a little bit. And one thing I see in society, especially in the last 10 years, is that we all have our heads in our phones, especially these teenagers. They don't get a lot of repetitions in talking to one another. Not a lot of people are telling them the truth in life. And so the 2 things you want to do is get those guys to be able to be radically transparent with one another and also get used to real-time feedback from a place of love from adults in their life. And so we feel like if they leave Blair basketball, being able to take feedback, real-time feedback, and also learn the give and take of peer-to-peer feedback, which is even more important. I just think they're ready to be successful with their college teams. I think they're ready to work in a corporate setting. I think they're probably going to be better husbands and fathers. We all need to learn to tell each other the truth from a place of care. And it's something that we intentionally do daily at Blair. And it's something that I'm more proud of that than any of the championships we've won, frankly.
The way you outline that, the way you phrase it, coaches listen to that many times because I feel like this is our biggest responsibility for young players is to teach them this because we've lost this. You can talk about old school, new school, whatever school. None of that. What we've lost is the ability to be able to tell players they can do something better. And you referenced peer coaching. That's probably one of the biggest areas where this can be improved. But just that reality of being able to tell players they can do something better while telling them, look, I'm not telling you you're bad. I'm just telling you can do something better. So take us through this. How do you do this more specifically for your players? How do you start to build this mindset of being able to accept this radical transparency?
First of all, it's a relationship-based philosophy. So I don't understand how any of us can coach at any level, whether it's grade school or Power 5 college. I don't understand how when someone feels like Steve Clifford says it to me like this all the time. He says the two things that players care about is this. They care about, do you care about me? And can you help me get better? And to me, that's the jumping off point. Do I have credibility as a basketball coach? Does my staff have credibility as basketball coaches and as developers? And then do these guys feel like, and do their parents, frankly, feel like we care about them? I think if we have basketball credibility, and again, not that we're perfect every time, there's plenty of times where I say to these guys, man, I don't know why I ran that under out of bounds play. That made no sense. Or that was a terrible call by me. Or I don't know why we're trapping ball screens here. We just gave up a three. That's an awful coverage call by me. Have to be vulnerable, and not that I'm perfect, but that I'm working really hard to be the best coach I can be, as is my great staff. And then you're going to hear the truth from me every day. I care about you. And the reason I'm telling you the truth is because I want you to improve. And I care about your development. I care about you as a person. And I actually don't think it's that hard. The one advantage that I have here and that college coaches have over some guy at a public school who might be listening to this is that I get to pick the parents that I want to deal with. And I think that if a kid has been told he's the greatest thing since sliced bread his whole life, and he gets to me at age 16, and I'm trying to practice radical transparency with a kid who's never had any piece of it, we can get there, but it's going to be a longer road. But I really like to coach kids from families where there's been some truth telling in their lives already. But I just think it's a crucial part of being an educator as well as a coach.
And clearly, we're not saying don't be intense. We're not saying that, but clearly you're doing this in a productive way, productive conversation way. This is many conversations. This is many conversations. This is not a big speech. This is not yelling. This is not that. So again, in a practice situation, you need to correct a player. How does Coach Joe do that?
It totally depends on the situation, but I'm going to be database, first of all. I'm not going to correct a player on a thing that I haven't taught them before, second of all, which I've watched in many gyms. It's not what I know, it's what I've already taught them and what they should know. It's not going to usually be loudly if it's the first or even the second time I'm making that correction. And I tell these guys all the time, like, you guys can make all the skill-based mistakes that you make as long as you're trying to make the right play. And a lot of times I'll stop the play and I'll say, what did you see there? Because they might see it different than me. I have a couple of guys that are savants on my team right now. They might have seen something that I didn't see. So before I do jump them or before I do make a correction, I might say, what did you see? And then I think lastly, like, we need terminology for shot selection. We need terminology for single gaps and double gaps. Like, when I was a young coach, it was like, you don't know how to play, or this guy's a low IQ, he can't learn. When I start to say, hey, we want you to drive when there's a double gap, but you're not a single gap driver, or we want you to shoot threes on a long closeout, but not on a short closeout. You're not a short closeout three ball shooter. You're a long closeout three ball shooter. And to have phraseology around the IQ and around decision making in a game, I think allows us to correct without raising our voice, allows us to have data and terminology behind what we are saying. This shot's a better shot for us than that shot. We haven't touched the paint in this possession yet. We haven't rolled to the paint. We haven't cut to the paint. We haven't touched the paint with the ball. So we don't want this three yet. Not because you can't shoot a three, but you understand conceptually what we want out of our offense. So these are, as an older coach, discussions, terminology, and database discussions. When the voice will get raised is when the same mistake gets made over and over. When the voice will get raised is when I think these decisions are being made out of selfishness, or when I think that the kid doesn't have the best interest of the team at heart, which isn't very often, frankly. Or if I think I need to disrupt the practice by raising my voice, even if it's just, I might even tell a kid like, hey, I'm gonna raise my voice in 5 minutes, and it's probably gonna be coming at you, but we need to jumpstart this practice. A lot of times when I raise my voice, it's an act, whether with a ref or whether with a player. Sometimes it's just to change the energy in the space. So yeah, but that's stuff that took me 10, 15, 17 years to get comfortable doing. And I would hope that this new generation of coaches, with people like you mentoring us, I would hope that the 30-year-old head coaches could get to this much quicker than I did, because I had my lunatic days in my early days, for sure, when I was not practicing what I am now preaching.
So did I. And because you and I were raised in that environment. And I do
Right.
think the younger coaches do a better job because they're not raised in that environment. So they don't have that model, that mentor that kind of portrayed it. And then you and I had to work through this. There's no question. And I still have to work through it because that's by default what we learned, isn't it?
No, absolutely. And there's probably some of my former players listening to this, shaking their heads. Will be listening to this and will be shaking their heads. But yeah, I think it's a much more enjoyable way to coach. I think when you're thinking about people's mental health now in a way that we didn't 15 years ago, it's all connected. And I just think it's a much better way to coach, and it all fits in with what we're doing.
Speaking of it all fits in, when I go to the Blair Academy website, basketball page, you're very transparent about outlining your philosophy, which is beautiful. And this connects nicely to buy-in and accountability, which is a big part of your philosophy as well. So connect those two ideas. This radical transparency leads to obviously being able to hold people accountable, not just you, but your players holding each other accountable as well.
Yeah, we try to talk very frankly on families' way into this place, that they're going to be held accountable, they're going to be coached hard, they're going to be loved hard, that this is a big pond, and that some guys are just wired they'd rather be a big fish in a small pond. And we try to tell those guys, this is probably not a great place for you if you want to. You're here for Instagram likes, and you're here for scoring 1,000 points, and you're here for individual accolades. There's plenty of prep schools you can go be a big fish in a small pond, and most years this is not one of them. And so we try to really be out ahead of what we are, because we feel like families and athletes, they self-select into this place, and that's what we want. We want the kids that hear what it is, hear how it's going to be, and say, yes, that's what I want. And I want to be able to look at mom when she's sitting in my office and you sure? Like, he may not play as a sophomore here, and he's got a battle, and we have 10 Division I guys in the gym, and every day is going to be a war in here. Like, you sure this is what you want? Because if you don't, we don't want you here. I can't talk at New Year's Eve about the fact that little Johnny hasn't played that much as a sophomore. And so I don't know that you can do that as easily in college right now with the current landscape, but these are kids. This is not business. I'm not being paid on how many games I win. I want parents and athletes to say, hey, he did what he said he was going to do. That's what I tell them all. I don't care whether you like me, don't like me, you start, you don't play. I want you to say he was straightforward with me, and he and his assistant coaches, they did what they said they were going to do. And I feel really good about that. I think we do that.
I'm curious if giving this type of approach to, especially again, in terms of potential players coming into your program, giving this type of approach, does it help you avoid any conflicts later, more so than we've got to do this really spectacular sell to players on, oh, look at all this stuff, look at this, look at where our players have all gone. That's all a part of it. They can learn that, but does this help in any way for kind of future ability to be able to coach the players?
Great question. The answer to that, it helps immensely. I think it gets
People need to
4/5
hear it
of
from
the
you though, because
4/5
I'm
of the
telling you,
garbage gets out of
I'm
the
sorry, I
way.
don't want to interrupt, but like just literally having two daughters in this space, I cannot believe how many people are sold on just being shiny objects and not on their future development and their future potential. And
Yeah,
that's hard to
no,
get to.
it is hard to get to. And often, you have two daughters. Often people go through this space one time. Maybe you're lucky enough to have a couple of kids, but they don't know what they're looking for. They don't know what they don't know. I would say not only front loading it then, but also, I have to have a lot of my difficult conversations early in the fall, early in the season. I want to jump into those disputes and get out ahead of anything that I see coming. Again, I've done this for a long time, so I can often say, oh, geez, they both want to be the point guard. Neither one of them is running out to the two side and filling the lane. Like, they're both coming back for the ball. Like, we have a problem here. So I will get right out ahead of it. Hey, man, whoever gets that rebound's pushing it. The other guy needs to fill. Like, you need to trust each other. I don't want that to fester 4 or 5 games in, and now we have a problem. Parents are calling me. Like, I'm going to get out ahead of that in the fall. I'm going to talk to real talk with these guys about role identification and role fulfillment. I'm going to help them identify what their role is going to be on any given team, but they have to have role acceptance. And we talk about role acceptance. Those are the kids that don't play here. The kids that can't accept their role, because we're going to give them data why that should be their role. And we're not going to put a ceiling on their role. We might put a ceiling on their role sophomore year. Hey, man, you're an offensive rebounder, you're a transition runner, and you're a defender. Now, doesn't mean when you make 10,000 shots this spring Now, all of a sudden, you might be able to stretch the floor for us and shoot 6 threes as a junior. But right now, if you want to get on the floor, you need to be a switchable defender and a great tag up guy on the offensive glass. Yeah, role identification and then role acceptance. And that's where every conversation starts and ends.
And a lot of those connect back to your initial conversations, of course. So you're just giving
Of
them
course.
reminders and refreshers, and that's a far easier process than trying to sell them after the fact.
Yeah, I don't know why you would do it the other way. It just makes for so many more headaches, heartaches, tougher conversations. And
Because
what's
it's
the
easier to get the
easiest way
kid
to lose your
initially,
credibility?
isn't it? Like,
Well, you lose your credibility as a leader. If someone is saying about me or one of my assistants, hey, he lied to me on the way in, what credibility do I have about anything I say after that? Whether it's, hey, you should get your left foot up on your jump shot or hold your release a little longer, or here's the role I think you should take on. If I lied to them on the way in, or they think I lied to them on the way in, we're already starting from behind. And that erosion of trust, I hear that from my athletes at the college level too often, where they don't trust the coaches. They were told something different on the way in. Certainly not everyone, but there's a lot of that at the college level, and especially in this transactional time we're in now.
you referenced teaching players how to play. So maybe from that perspective, what does the teaching process look like on a daily basis that helps players develop conceptually? You've already referenced how you teach, but what does it actually look like? What are we doing in your practices that help players learn how to play?
Again, a lot of this was taken from some of your early videos and your early teaching. I have a guy, John DeJesus, who's my associate head coach, who's one of the best individual developers I've been around at any level, and he's tremendous here. And he and I have built in so much decision making into our individual development. And we're not afraid to do on-air development. We do plenty of on-air development. It's not all decision based, but it always leads to decision based. And so the lead up ends with decision based. And so when we began 7, 8 years ago to develop more decision based individual development, that then made it easier when we started to do 3-on-3 and 5-on-5. And I know I've said this multiple times, but also having the terminology. I've mentioned this on other podcasts, but something as simple as when you drive and see a chest, spray it. When you drive and see an arm, finish it, which we got from Jay Wright at Villanova, which sounds like a middle school phraseology. And what I've landed on in year 26 is like, how simple can I make it? To me, the genius of coaching is to be able to take something really complicated and just grind it down to its absolute most simplistic. And there was an ego part of me that didn't want to be simple when I was a young coach. I wanted to prove to people how much I knew. And now there are aspects of my practice that you could take, and if you had your 7th and 8th grade, 12 and 13-year-old girls, it would fit perfect. We wouldn't have to change anything. And I'm really proud of that. Some people might think otherwise, but we don't have 900 cones and 17 different finishes. We're being simplistic. We're reading the game. We have terminology that fits with our teaching. And I think it morphs very well from one-on-one all the way up to 5-on-5. And we try to play a conceptual brand of offense, and we try to teach our individual stuff conceptually. And it starts and ends with John DeJesus. He's really good at it. He works really hard at it.
Love that. And no, this is like the ultimate compliment to a coach like yourself is that I feel like I could drop my team in your practices and you would add to what they do. And it wouldn't be an issue at all what you did. Whatever you did would help those players develop. And to me, that's the sign of what we're talking about in terms of this conceptual development, a common sense approach. And as you said, simplicity, right? Understanding those decisions. You see their chest versus you don't see their chest type of decisions. And that phrasing is so important to be able to add to it. So talk to us about the process. You reference obviously learning some stuff from me, which is awesome. I'm grateful for that. But just talk to me about the process of changing a little bit over the years to this type of approach. And it doesn't happen in one day. And I think coaches still fear it a little bit, but talk to us about that process.
Look, we have lost 13 state championships here. We've won plenty, but we've lost more than we've won. And it was brutal. I got to be honest. It was brutal. We've won like 20 league championships in 26 years, but many of those years, our season would end on the last day with a loss to the same team. And there was a number of years Danny Hurley was coaching that team, and it turns out he's a pretty good coach. That wasn't too bad to lose to Danny. I could do a couple of things with that and my staff. We could either say we're not going to be able to get over that hump. We could say our players aren't good enough. Or we could say, all right, we're winning 20 games, we're winning the league, we're beating a lot of good teams, but we can't get over the hump against this one team often enough. And so while it was brutal in the moment, those losses, we decided as a staff, and I decided personally as the head coach, that we had to get better and that we were going to take this disappointment and we were going to use it as a way to learn and grow. And the first place I was going to point a finger was at myself. And how was I going to get better? And you have so many resources to get better now, whether it be people like you or YouTube videos or social media, but I also have access to these amazing coaches who are in my gym every day. So one thing that people don't believe, but it's true, I say to college coaches in my gym all the time, I'll say, what didn't you like about practice today? And they're recruiters, right? They're salesmen. Most of them aren't. I'll say it to head coaches too, and they'll try to say something nice. Oh, and I'll say, honestly, don't even call on player X and tell me something about practice you didn't like, or terminology that you have better terminology for, or something we taught that you taught differently, even if it's not better than what we did, but tell me something you do different than what you saw us do today. And so I've gotten so much good feedback that way, where you just have to be vulnerable and ask for it. And I've gotten a lot of good feedback that way, but it starts with pointing the finger at myself and just trying to incrementally grow.
I love that point, and that's such a great way to be able to approach it whenever you have guests in your gym. I remember attending a Detroit Pistons practice with Stan Van Gundy, and he handed out a card afterwards, and it basically had that one question: "What could we do better?" And it was like, again, the humility of that, and the open-mindedness of that, and whatever he did with that, who knows? But just to ask the question is such a valuable part of that. That's such a cool thing. So much knowledge already, Coach, but maybe what are some things that we haven't talked about here that you'd like to share with coaches around the world that are listening?
Well, the one thing, and I think the last thing I would like to share is, and I heard Brett Brown say this. I had the great pleasure to work for Brett's father, was the first person who hired me as a volunteer assistant in 1991 at Boston University, and probably wouldn't have gotten to anywhere I got to without Coach Brown hiring me many moons ago when I was probably underqualified. But I've heard Brett say on many occasions, what is the most important thing? And I find Brett to be a tremendous coach, both for the Australian Olympic team and obviously with the Sixers and now back with the Spurs. And I think that's such a simple phrase. And I think so many of us, when we were young coaches, we didn't know what the most important thing was. We didn't know what made us win at the particular job that we had. And I think trying to figure out in every job that you have what the most important thing is, the development of your kids, just getting them better. Are you a middle school coach? You just want to get them ready to be a varsity player. How do you win at a high level prep school like I have? What's the most important thing at a public school when you just get to coach whoever shows up at tryouts that year, or all the way to understanding your league? Tony Bennett figured out that he was going to go to the ACC and play totally different. If he wasn't going to line up and beat Duke and Carolina playing the way they played, he's blocker mover, played slow, decided in his league that he was going to do something different. So all that is to say, it sounds really easy, but it's not. What is the most important thing at your job, and what do you need to do to help your team win and be successful, whatever success means in the space that you're in? And that's what I like to share with young coaches all the time. And you wouldn't be surprised, Chris, but many people would be surprised how people can't actually articulate that. I'll say, no, that's a real question. That's not a rhetorical question. What do you think's the most important thing at your job? And oftentimes young coaches can't articulate that. And I bet I probably couldn't have articulated that either when I was a 30-year-old new head coach. I think for young head coaches, that's something really important to think about. And I think we should have a written version of that. I think that should be something that I should be able to email to someone. I think our philosophy should be ongoing, but it's not just an overall general philosophy. It's a very specific, what's the most important thing or things. And I think that's a really interesting way to think about leadership and think about coaching.
Coaches, you have your homework. Send us that, tweet us that, share that with both of us. I'd love to hear that from coaches. What's the most important thing? That's such a great actionable idea. And I love that, Coach. Incredible insights throughout the podcast. Coaches, you have to listen to this multiple times, which I love as well to get all the insights. But Coach Joe, thank you so much for sharing the game with us.
Thanks, Chris. Absolute pleasure to be on with you. A real honor.